Hello, everyone. Lovely to be here. Now, over a year into the pandemic, it's incredible how quickly things have changed. How we work, how we shop, how restaurants work, how we spend our leisure time. But what's really interesting to me is that in some senses, from a cyber perspective, the more things change, the more they actually stay the same. My name's Peter Cohen, Managing Director at Holistic Cyber. Over the next few minutes, we'll be talking through what's a pretty hot topic right now, Russia and its cyber threat. We'll start by looking at why its latest attacks into the global software supply chain aren't actually anything new, but we'll also take a look at what the next 10 years of Russian cyber have in store for us. And trust me, this certainly is different and well worth understanding. But let's start with a look at the hot topic of the day, SolarWinds, and by turning the clock back 4 years to 2017. Now, it seems like our industry has been turned upside down by SolarWinds. It's all anyone can talk about, and the irony here is not lost on me. But really, why is this the case? Why are we treating it so differently? Is it the method by which the attack was carried out? Is that new? Is it the impact? Spoiler alert, it could have been much worse. Maybe it's because it was the Russians. Well, that's certainly nothing new, and we'll come on to more of that later. But here we can see a short paper published by the US Director of National Intelligence in 2017. The topic, well, hackers are circumventing traditional cyber defenses to compromise software to enable successful, rewarding, and stealthy methods to subvert large numbers of computers through a single attack. Written in 2017. Sound familiar? Okay, so we've known about all this for a while, and 4 years is really a lifetime in cyber. So that software supply chain attacks are a thing, an important thing, a dangerous thing, a dangerous systemic vulnerability. So much so that US national intelligence felt the need to highlight it. And in fact, it's not like US intelligence have based their judgment on a series of obscure cyber attacks unknown by the general public or our industry. I mean, just look at this list. Some of the most damaging and most highly publicized cyber attacks in history. And what ties them together? They're all software supply chain attacks. A quick roll call, won't go through all of them, but at the top, Havex, Russian state-sponsored actor, installing a Trojanized update on industrial control system vendor websites to deliver their malware into industrial control environments. Havex, remote access Trojan, then delivered additional payloads to compromised systems. Kingslayer, Chinese this time, compromised the website and the update server of a company that helped Windows system administrators review and interpret Windows event logs. Once installed, it pulled down secondary malware. Not pettier, should need no introduction. The infection vector initially was a Trojanized Ukrainian accounting software, which then spread around the world, causing billions in damages. Shadowhammer, this was in 2019, the Asus PC upstate, highly targeted espionage campaign that infected over 1 million with a backdoor that allowed 583 targets to be infected with additional very stealthy malware payloads identified through the target computer's MAC address. And by the way, the security industry has not held back in assigning some of its best and most media-friendly names to these supply chain attacks. Havex, Kingslayer, Shadowhammer. I mean, even the Sunburst component of the SolarWinds attack is a pretty cool name. Anyway, I digress. The point is that this kind of attack, compromising legitimate software updates to deliver your own malicious code and creating backdoors, is absolutely nothing new. And gaining a wide foothold to selectively then deploy secondary malware in a stealthy way is also nothing new. So if it's nothing new, then SolarWinds shouldn't really serve as a wake-up call or just a one-off event to take note from. It should serve as compelling evidence that we have a systemic problem that needs to be taken care of, and it needs to be taken care of now. So what to do? Well, this is a complex problem, and it's not one that we're going to solve here in this talk today, that's for sure. That said, there are some principles that everyone should be thinking about, regardless of their place in this chain. Now, this is a super high-level view, and the problem is a systemic, complex one, and in some cases may require a complete rethink of the IT and supplier ecosystem. However, at a high level, there are steps we can all take on the software supplier side. Things like hardening distribution, building better governance, as development progresses, and also better detection. After all, it's the software suppliers getting the initial vectors of phishing watering holes at an initial code execution. And as we know, this stuff can be detected if we put our mind to it. For those of us on the software consumer side, really it's about damage limitation, restricting the ability of a malicious update to do malicious things, putting in segmentation, an architecture review, restricting connectivity to manage service suppliers and things along these lines. However, as we all know, to do that effectively, a lot of this really depends on who we're actually trying to defend against and to really understand their motivation. If we understand motivation, then we can put in the most appropriate defenses. So to do that, to understand motivation, I want to take a step back away from this and look at our latest and our most current supply chain attacker of the moment. Yes, we're going to take a look at Russia. I'd like to take a look at Russia today before we take a look at them in future and what the future might hold. And by the way, this view is nation state only. We aren't touching on criminal groups right now, even though we all know they can be used as proxies by the Kremlin in order to maintain plausible deniability while continuing to inflict economic damage on the West. But this is a nation state view. So there's the big three, which are on screen now. There are additional smaller groups, but we won't address those today. And all three of these carry different motivations, which are really worth understanding. So first up, the FSB. So that's the internal security service of Russia. Focus on Russia itself, but also have a remit to destabilize and promote Russian interests within former USSR countries. And we'll come on to that later. Next up, GRU. So this is Russian military intelligence. So historically, they've been involved in world wars, Cold War, responsible for accessing, holding, maintaining details of critical infrastructure in potentially hostile countries. And that infrastructure might include dams, power plants, water supplies, things like that, in case they needed to blow them up. Not much has changed. They now just use cyber to do it. And finally, the SVR, so of suspected SolarWinds attack fame. This is Russia's foreign intelligence service with a remit firmly in espionage. Now, you may or may not have heard those terms before, GRU, FSB, SVR. But if you haven't, or you're a bit confused, it's with good reason. Now, the cybersecurity industry makes it impossible to understand who is actually who. And by the way, this is completely by design. You see, researching these threat groups is effectively marketing for cybersecurity companies. And if another cybersecurity company has already come up with a naming convention, for example, APT or something BEAR, then adding your own research to an existing naming convention diminishes your own marketing while legitimizing your competitors. Hence, we're left with this absolutely horrible list that makes communication almost impossible, particularly at the board level. For example, you might think we need to defend against APT 28, and someone else might say, no, what about Fancy Bear? Someone said that was a priority, or SEDNet, Pornstorm. There's too many. Guess what? It's all the Russian GRU, and it's made much more complex than it needs to be. As an aside, this is really something the industry needs to fix. But you know what? All of that said, it's not so clear cut. This is one of my favorite slides from a talk by Kimberly Zenz at Black Hat a couple of years back. Kimberly is a German threat researcher, and this shows a really complex web linking Russian state actors, Putin, criminals, oligarchs, even some cyber companies, such as Kaspersky and Group IB, which are connected, as well as some of the targets that were attacked from a cyber perspective. So it's not a simple problem to understand or to solve. And so how has all this manifested itself? Well, let's take a look at a roll call of some of the high profile attacks in recent times. So at the top, NotPetya by the GRU, highly destructive, as we know, aimed at destabilizing Ukraine initially, before spreading globally, causing untold damage. SolarWinds believed to be the SVR, so focused there on stealth and in acquiring very targeted intelligence motivated by espionage. Back to the Ukraine, Black Energy, destructive attack that took out the Ukrainian power grid. Again, GRU involvement suspected. German Parliament, now this was slightly different, as it was an espionage, intelligence-based campaign, but it was carried out by the the GRU, not the SVR. But when we consider that the intelligence gathered may have been linked to understanding critical infrastructure in Germany, then this starts to make more sense. In a similar vein, ongoing pre-positioning of cyber footholds in Western, including the UK, Western energy and critical infrastructure supply chains by the GRU, numerous compromises in the UK, nothing destroyed, but a foothold to allow ongoing surveillance and potentially moving something more destructive should geopolitical situations change. Winter Olympics in 2018 and suspected Summer Olympics in Tokyo 2020, if they hadn't been postponed, a destructive attack by the GRU. And let's remember that Russian athletes are still banned from competing under the Russia flag due to systemic doping allegations. The Democrat Party hack in the US, driven by espionage and data theft, but designed to effect change and sow chaos in the US political landscape, carried out by the GU, and I think we can safely say mission accomplished. And let's not forget the FSB with their suspected involvement close to home in hacks across Estonia, Georgia, other former USSR states, sometimes in support of ground troop movements, sometimes in support of local pushback against influence from Moscow. So with all this happening in the present day, there's certainly an argument that we've kind of got our hands full enough without looking to the future, but I think it really is worth doing. And understanding these groups and their motivations is certainly key to understanding why some attacks go one way and some attacks sort of unfold in another way. And ultimately that helps us to inform defense. So here is the SolarWinds attack as it happened. 18,000 SolarWinds customers ended up downloading the malicious backdoor out of the media-friendly headline of 300,000 customers. It wasn't 300,000, it was 18,000. 50 high-value targets were selected by the threat actor and hit with laser-focused attacks aimed at maintaining stealth. Why so few? Well, attackers have limited resources too, and staying stealthy consumes a lot of resources. There may also be diplomatic reasons to restrict actual access, potentially to limit the US retaliation should they be discovered, which they were. But as we well understand at Holistic Cyber, based on our nation state background, all of these need balancing by the attack commander. And all of this gave several months of access to restricted systems at the heart of government and industry. But just for fun, let's swap the SVR foreign intelligence for the GRU military intelligence in attack mode. Similar initial execution, different motivation, totally different outcome. Remembering NotPetya, the Russian supply chain attack using malicious software update, causing billions of dollars in damages. If desired, the SolarWinds attack, if carried out in a similar vein, could have taken down US and other government departments and critical economic supply chains. Let's remember, if stealth isn't the concern, then the attacker can also move far, far faster. So it could have been worse. So understanding Russian cyber attack motivation is important, the difference between espionage and destruction. But really, to understand nation state cyber, we need to understand the nation state itself. And there are three overarching Russian state objectives today. I'll just read through them. So reclaim and secure Russia's influence over former Soviet nations while regaining Russia's worldwide recognition as a globally great power, while portraying itself as a reliable actor and a successful economic, military, and kind of political power broker. But since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia has really struggled to find itself and its place in the global community, which has left leadership with a lingering desire to regain the influence and the power that it kind of once perceived it had. In particular, Russia seeks to regain its influence over former Soviet states, which it claims are in its rightful sphere of influence. Now, one of the United States' core goals is promoting and protecting the international order, and this comes into direct contention with the goals of Russia's strategy. So what this serves to do is to underpin the Kremlin's belief that the Kremlin must contain and constrain US influence and activities in Europe and elsewhere. And there's a suggestion that Russian leadership's worldview is zero sum. It believes that in order for Russia to win, the US and its allies must lose. So to achieve these objectives, it's important to understand how the Russians are thinking. Now, the Russian leadership sees itself at war with the US and the West as a whole, and this is evidenced by the range of kind of grey zone activities which Russia engages in, and by this we mean kind of cyber, paramilitary, information warfare, things along these lines. And in fact, Russia believes that there is no unacceptable or illegitimate form of deterrence or escalation management to fight and win this war. Russia believes that they're able to, and they should be able to, integrate all instruments of state power as well as all non-military and military means to deter the US and NATO. Now, all of us here should sit up and take note. Russia does not view this as military against military, government against government. Everything from critical infrastructure, power, utilities, media, financial systems and services, everything is on the table, and it's on the table right now. Finally, overall, Russia's influence abroad is growing. This includes the interference in political processes, as we've seen, economic and energy exploitation, particularly in Africa at the moment, ongoing espionage, and also media and propaganda manipulation. We've seen Putin as adept at blending military and civilian elements for maximum impact. In recent months, we've also seen vaccine diplomacy. As the Sputnik vaccine has served to has been pushed out in territories outside Russia, and we can also we can often see cyber underpinning some of this influence as well. Now, we touched on information warfare and propaganda as a component of all this, and research from the University of Oxford's Internet Institute clearly demonstrates computational propaganda being executed en masse by Russia. Here on the chart on the right, we can see the green lines coming out of Russia and that's against a whole raft of countries via Facebook. Twitter targeting, funny enough, seems to be far less prevalent. Russian influence is focused solely on the US. The purpose here is to amplify and legitimize niche or alternative views in order to divide and weaken target societies. And based on the last few years, you have to say that Russia have done a pretty good job. So what's coming next? Well, the answer is nothing good. So Russia are seeking to construct a closed national network, originally tabled for 2024, currently on track to do it within the next 10 years. The idea is it's completely self-sufficient and can be disconnected from the global internet. And by that, I mean the country, Russia, can be disconnected from the global internet. And why would you do that? Well, it reshapes the electronic battle space. And let's just explore that for a minute. So Russia have embarked on constructing this closed national network, something they can disconnect from the wider world to give a strategic advantage. This allows them to define the territory where they fight and gives them strength through home advantage. So imagine for a moment releasing the next NotPetya and then simply pulling up the cyber drawbridge, or launching military or cyber operations while severely limiting the attack surface that Russia presents itself to the outside world. Huge strategic advantage. Meanwhile, Russia's opponents, such as the UK and the US, we have our networks open by design. The internet was built for open information sharing, and that's something that Russia are becoming masters of exploiting. And this effectively is the equation that Russia has calculated to create structural cyber asymmetry. It blends its closed national network while putting all of its connectivity infrastructure under state control and a kind of local governance system. So effectively what it's doing is becoming a closed national network that it can be disconnected from the global internet while still functioning normally in providing communications for state administration, national economy, civil society, and the military. If it can do all that, it gives itself the ability to wage information warfare and cyber attack with relative impunity. Is it real? Well, in December 19, there was a drill. They tested it. So the goal was to test if the country's national internet infrastructure, known inside Russia as RUNET, could function without access to the global DNS system and the external internet. All of Russia's internet traffic was rerouted internally, effectively making Russia's RUNET the world's largest intranet. No technical details about the tests and what exactly they consisted of were revealed, but the government did say that they tested several disconnection scenarios, including a scenario that simulated a hostile cyber attack from a foreign country. We also know that since then, economic pressures have slowed down some of the progress, but the target remains to achieve this within the next decade. And all this sounds too good to be true. Why is it so hard for the West to replicate then? It's not easy at all. And if, to really understand this, it's worth looking at the 7 subsystems that Russia are following in order to make this all possible. So first up, direct state ownership of technology assets. So the objective here is to ensure that Russia own and control and produce all of the infrastructure that underpins the state's cyber and connectivity power. It protects the supply chain, it helps Russia shape cyberspace. It does rely on Russian-produced hardware and software, which they're still a little way away from, but it's something that they're looking to achieve. It also provides Russia with the ability to give kind of military and state access through backdoors while preventing foreign powers from accessing the same. Second subsystem, state authentication and encryption. So this is basically ensuring that all encryption is domestically produced so that foreign powers can't get their hands on it. Third is content censorship and restriction. So it's the technological process of blacklisting, content management, removal, restriction. The objective here is political control through the removal of subversive information. Fourth up, targeted surveillance. So this kind of goes hand in hand with content censorship. Highly centralized. Its objectives are counterintelligence, law enforcement, and political control. Fifth, critical information infrastructure. So this is based on state ownership or indirect control of critical national infrastructure to enable the disconnection of Russia from the global internet, if required, and to allow the state to step in and control where needed. Finally, so sixth, we've got PSYOPs and information warfare. So this includes cyber and cyber espionage, cyber warfare, cyber attack. And finally, there we've got integration and management of all the above, and that includes things like training, feedback, monitoring, control, cyber training ranges, and state level exercises, and also kind of ensuring that everything is paid for. All of this is quite in depth, but it just goes to show how complex it is to put together a system of systems that allows you to disconnect a country from the internet, and it's why it's going to take Russia a few years to do, and it's not something that they can do overnight. And there are disadvantages as well. It's not easy, as we've said. Will they get all the way there? Some people don't think they will. It's hard to do. Creating domestic solutions for encryption and connectivity technologies, they may not be as good as Western supplied ones. May not be as strong. May be easier to break. Budget constraints are a real problem. The Russian economy is not strong, and there's a brain drain away from Moscow and away from Russia. The approach gives kind of disincentives for innovation. Censorship breeds resistance, as we know, in a kind of counterintuitive way. Actually, if you're creating a huge kind of disconnected national network, you're creating huge data retention targets, which may become a really valuable target for the West, and you may have you may risk disapproval from the international community, which I'm not too sure they care too much about. So let's get a sense of perspective here, though. You know, Russia's approach to information dominance is actually linked to their shortcomings at the moment. They have to use existing systems infrastructure, still using the Western model of technology as much as they're trying to develop their own. Right, the threat from Russia, you know, is it overblown by the media, particularly in the US? Potentially. You know, through the last 4 years of the Trump administration, the Democrats particularly had an interest in Russia being the bad guy. Russia is still portrayed as the main enemy, and you know, I think you know, potentially that is slightly blown out of proportion. We also have to consider that the likes of NATO exist to defend against Russia, and you know, we also have to consider you know, the wider threat landscape. So China, you know, China is very different, and this talk is not about China, but it does just help to put Russia into perspective if we touch on it very briefly. China's building a completely alternative, authoritative model of technology that you know, they're deploying in a completely different way across its own citizens, and you know, potentially trying to roll out across the world as well to give total control. They're a genuine superpower, economic powerhouse. You know, they take a 5, 20, 100-year planning approach with which to kind of regain their position as the world's preeminent superpower, and they have zero accountability. And from a cyber perspective, you know, their programs are absolutely prevalent. So I think you know, just putting Russia into perspective against the likes of China is worth doing. Not to say that Russia aren't bad, far from it, from a cyber perspective, but we have to consider the wider picture too. So defending against Russian GRU, this is the current NCSC guidance. Is it fit for purpose now? Possibly. I mean, these are some basic cyber hygiene measures that may cause, you know, a threat actor to think twice or to move on. But as always, it depends who you are and what the motivation to attack you is. So if it's a nation state threat group that has motivation to hit you specifically, these general controls are probably not enough. If you're part of an industry that's being targeted, in general terms, maybe they are. Will it defend against a SolarWinds style attack? No, it won't. And if that becomes more prevalent, then we do need a rethink. Will it defend against Russia developing their capabilities over the next decade, particularly if they feel safe in a kind of closed internet environment, as we've seen? No, I don't think they will. But as always, at Holistic Cyber, we believe in understanding motivation before an accurate threat model can really be decided. So if you are targeted and general hygiene-based controls aren't enough, what is the right approach? Well, firstly, Holistic Cyber, we believe you have to ensure the team you work with have the right battle-hardened expertise, preferably a proven attack background or one from nation-state defense. Secondly, ensuring that you always take the attacker point of view when assessing your defenses. What's important to you or important to your audit team is really not important to an attacker. Third, cyber is so much about so much more than just technology. So resourceful cyber threats will leverage business processes, HR, your people, your supply chain. It's important to take the holistic view. And finally, let technology do what it's good at, automating where you can, and ensure that you've got the right people driving your strategy, but also solving business critical complex problems. So that's all for today. Thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to discuss any of this or your own perspective on cyber defense, please do get in touch. You can find me on LinkedIn or via the Holistic Cyber website. Thanks again.